There was a time, before the stars had names, when gods ruled the cosmos. They watched over everything, from the smallest dust particles floating in the void to the largest celestial bodies that glowed with life. The gods had nothing to fear. They were the creators, the rulers, and they were eternal. At least, that's what they thought. Then, from one insignificant planet, from a place none of them paid attention to, came a species unlike any other. They were fragile, born of flesh, bound to their tiny world by gravity and fear of the unknown. These creatures, humans they called themselves, had nothing. No immortality, no divine power. They lived short, brutal lives, constantly at war with their environment, their bodies, and each other. Yet, against all odds, humans survived. More than that, they thrived. The gods noticed too late. By the time they turned their attention to Earth, the humans had already begun to leave their cradle. They had broken the chains of their atmosphere and reached out into the darkness of space. What puzzled the gods the most wasn't humanity's technology, their spaceships, or their relentless need to explore. No, it was something far more dangerous. It was their will. Humanity didn't stop, even when they should have. When their first colony on Mars failed, when entire fleets disappeared into the blackness of space, when wars broke out over resources, they pushed forward. They didn't fear failure, and that was something the gods had never seen before. Zeus, the king of the ancient gods, was the first to speak of it. He stood before the great council of deities, the ones who had shaped the universe since time began, and his voice trembled. "These creatures, they are not like the others," he said, his eyes distant, as if recalling a nightmare. "We created them, but they do not know their place." The other gods laughed. Thor, the god of thunder, slammed his hammer against the ground and sneered. "They are ants. Do not waste our time with such nonsense, Zeus." But Zeus did not back down. His brow furrowed, and the lightning that usually danced in his eyes was absent. "You have not seen what I have seen. They defy everything. They defy us." Odin, Thor's father, and the all-seeing ruler of the Norse pantheon, leaned forward in his seat. His one eye glimmered with curiosity. "What are you saying, Zeus? That these mortals could challenge us?" The air in the council chamber grew thick with tension. Zeus hesitated, but he knew the truth. He had to speak it, no matter the mockery it would bring. "I am saying," he began, "that if we do not stop them now, they will surpass us." The laughter that followed echoed through the heavens. Ares, the god of war, nearly doubled over in his chair, his armor clanking as he slapped his knee. "Surpass us. We are eternal. They burn out in a blink of an eye. They are nothing." But Zeus wasn't convinced, and neither was Odin. The two oldest gods exchanged a look. They knew, even if they didn't want to admit it, that something was different about humanity. Other species, other creations, had come and gone. Civilizations had risen and fallen under the watchful eyes of the gods, but none had ever reached beyond their worlds with such determination. None had ever dared to think they could match the gods themselves. In the following centuries, as humanity spread through the stars, the gods watched more closely. What they saw troubled them deeply. Humanity was not just expanding, they were evolving. They were learning, faster than any race before them. They conquered planets, systems, entire galaxies. Where others would have faltered, they adapted. When resources ran dry, they invented new ways to survive. When they faced hostile alien species, they fought with a savagery that left even the gods speechless. But what truly terrified the gods was humanity's disregard for their creators. The ancient temples on Earth crumbled. The prayers that once filled the heavens with praise and devotion fell silent. Humanity had moved on. They no longer needed gods. And that was the final insult. By the time the first human ship entered the outer realms of the divine, Zeus could feel the shift. It was a cold, gnawing sensation in his gut. Humanity wasn't just coming for the stars. They were coming for the throne of the gods themselves. The first contact came on a quiet day. No thunder, no omens, just a ship, sleek and black, breaking through the atmosphere of Mount Olympus. The gods, used to such visits from alien races, paid little attention at first. But when the ship landed at the foot of Zeus's throne, they realized this was no ordinary visitor. The door opened, and from within stepped a single human. He was tall, his body wrapped in a suit that glimmered with strange energy. His face was calm, his eyes cold and calculating. He was no warrior, no soldier. He was something far more dangerous. He was a scientist. "Greetings," the human said, his voice carrying through the divine halls with a confidence that sent a shiver down even Thor's spine. "My name is Dr. Elias Vance, and I'm here on behalf of the United Human Federation." Zeus rose from his throne, his hand gripping the armrest. "You dare come before us, mortal, and speak as if you are our equals." Dr. Vance smiled. It was a small, almost mocking smile. "Equal," he repeated. "No, we're not your equals." Zeus's eyes flared with lightning, but before he could speak, Dr. Vance continued. "We're your replacements." For the first time in millennia, silence filled the halls of Olympus. The gods, the rulers of the universe, stared at this human, this insignificant being, who stood before them without fear. And in that moment, they understood. The age of gods was over. Humanity had no need for them anymore. And that, more than anything, is what terrified them the most. Zeus stood frozen, staring at Dr. Elias Vance with a mix of disbelief and rage. His fingers twitched, sparks of lightning flickering at his fingertips. This mortal, this speck of nothing, dared to mock him, dared to suggest that humans could replace the gods? The air crackled with tension, and the other gods shifted in their seats, unsure of what was about to happen next. Thor, ever the hothead, was the first to break the silence. He stepped forward, Mjolnir in hand, his eyes blazing with fury. "I will crush you where you stand, mortals." His voice boomed like thunder, shaking the very foundations of Olympus. But Dr. Vance didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, he looked Thor dead in the eye and smiled again, that same small, unsettling smile. "Do you really want to test that theory?" Thor roared, raising his hammer high, ready to bring it down with all the force of the heavens. But before he could strike, Odin's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Stop." Thor hesitated, glancing at his father in confusion. Odin's one good eye was fixed on Dr. Vance, and there was no mistaking the look in the All-Father's gaze. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even defiance. It was curiosity, and beneath that, a sliver of fear. "Who sent you?" Odin asked, his voice calm but firm. "And what do you want from us?" Dr. Vance tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. "No one sent me, Odin. I'm here on my own, but I do represent humanity, if that's what you're asking. As for what we want..." He paused, his smile fading. "We don't want anything from you. We don't need anything from you. You had your time. It's over." The gods shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Mortals were supposed to beg, to grovel, to worship. They weren't supposed to come to Olympus and declare the gods obsolete. Ares, always eager for a fight, sneered at Dr. Vance. "You think you can just walk into our realm and claim superiority? You're nothing without us. We made you." Dr. Vance's eyes flicked to Ares, cold and calculating. "Did you? Or did we make ourselves? You may have shaped the first humans, but everything we are now, our technology, our knowledge, our power, that's ours. We didn't get here because of your blessings. We got here in spite of them." The room fell silent again. Ares clenched his fists, his face a mask of fury, but he didn't move. Not yet. Odin, still watching Dr. Vance with that unsettling gaze, leaned forward in his throne. "And what now? You've come here, to the seat of the gods, and you speak of replacement. What exactly are you proposing, humans?" Dr. Vance spread his hands, as if the answer was obvious. "Simple. We're offering you a choice." Zeus, finally finding his voice again, snarled. "A choice? What choice could you possibly offer the gods?" Dr. Vance met his gaze, unflinching. You can step down willingly. Fade into myth, into history. Let humanity take its place at the top of the cosmic order. Or, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and oppressive. The gods were silent, each one processing the enormity of what they were hearing. Step down, give up their power, their immortality, their dominion over the universe. It was unthinkable, but there was something in Dr. Vance's eyes, something that told them this wasn't a bluff. Humanity had changed. They weren't the fearful, ignorant beings the gods had once controlled. They had grown, evolved, and now they were standing at the gates of Olympus, demanding their turn. It was unthinkable, but it was also undeniable. Do you really think you can kill us? Hera's voice broke the silence, cold and sharp as ice. The queen of the gods glared at Dr. Vance with contempt. We are eternal. We cannot die. Dr. Vance's smile returned, colder than before. That's what you used to believe, isn't it? That you couldn't die, that nothing could touch you. But times change, Hera. We've been studying you for centuries. We know your weaknesses. We know how to end you. A murmur of shock rippled through the gods. End them. No one in all of existence had ever spoken of such a thing. The gods had always believed themselves invincible. But now, as they looked at Dr. Vance, they saw something that chilled them to their cores. They saw certainty. Dr. Vance took a step closer, and the gods unconsciously recoiled. You don't believe me? He asked softly. Would you like a demonstration? Before anyone could react, Dr. Vance raised his hand, and from the sleeve of his suit, a small device emerged. It was no larger than a coin, but the moment it appeared, the gods felt it. A sudden, sharp shift in the air, as if the very fabric of reality had been altered. What is that? Poseidon growled, rising from his seat. Dr. Vance didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a button on the device, and the effect was immediate. Hades, god of the underworld, screamed. The sound was unlike anything the gods had ever heard. It was a scream of pure, unfiltered agony. Hades clutched his chest, his body writhing as if being torn apart from the inside. His dark, imposing figure crumbled, and for the first time in his eternal existence, the Lord of the Dead looked fragile. Mortal, what have you done? Zeus bellowed, rushing to his brother's side. Dr. Vance lowered the device, watching Hades with a clinical detachment. This is what we've been working on, a way to neutralize your immortality, to strip you of your divine essence. You're not invincible anymore. Hades' form flickered, his once godly aura dimming. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The other gods stared in horror, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. One of their own, one of the ancient, unkillable gods, was dying. Dr. Vance stepped back, giving them space. That was just a small demonstration, a taste of what's coming. We don't need to fight you. We don't even need to kill you. All we have to do is wait. Zeus's eyes blazed with fury, but beneath that, there was fear. For the first time in his eternal life, the king of the gods felt fear, not of war, not of death, but of irrelevance, of being forgotten. And as Hades' body began to dissolve into nothingness, Zeus knew, deep down, that humanity wasn't bluffing. The gods had ruled for millennia. They had shaped the stars, bent reality to their will, and stood above all creation as beings of unimaginable power. But now, they were facing something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. They were facing humanity, and the gods were afraid. Olympus was never quiet. It was always alive with the hum of divine energy, the whispers of the gods, and the faint echoes of the universe itself bending to their will. But now, for the first time in eternity, Olympus stood in silence. The gods, once confident in their immortality, watched as Hades, a brother, a king, disintegrated before their eyes. Zeus knelt beside his fallen brother, the god of the underworld, now nothing more than dust in the wind. The look on his face was something no mortal had ever seen. It wasn't rage. It wasn't vengeance. It was helplessness. Zeus, the god of gods, had no idea how to stop what was coming. Dr. Vance, standing tall amidst the divine assembly, waited patiently, as if watching the natural course of things unfold. He had no weapon, no armor, yet he held more power in that moment than any of the gods. His calm, unflinching demeanor only deepened the wound he'd just inflicted. The gods, for the first time, truly felt vulnerable. "You see now," Dr. Vance said, his voice cutting through the thick tension, "this isn't a fight you can win. We've studied you, your histories, your weaknesses. Every myth, every legend, it's been fuel for our science. You were never invincible. You just never met an opponent who knew how to take you down." Ares, fists still clenched tight, spat onto the marble floor of the council hall. "You think you've won already? This little trick of yours won't last. We'll find a way to." "You won't." Dr. Vance interrupted sharply, his gaze shifting to Ares. "You're gods of war, gods of power. You fight, you conquer. But that's your weakness. You don't adapt. You don't think the way we do. We've been solving problems for millennia while you've been sitting on your thrones, basking in your so-called eternity. You've grown complacent." The gods bristled, the tension in the air growing thick enough to suffocate. Even Thor, who had earlier mocked the human's presence, now stood uneasily, his hands still gripping Mjolnir, but without the same confidence. "You may not understand yet," Dr. Vance continued, "but this is the turning point. You can fight us, and it will end badly for you. Or you can accept that your time is over." Zeus finally stood, his face grim, his hands still trembling with the residual power of his lightning. "What do you want?" His voice was quieter than before, lacking the usual thunderous weight it carried. Dr. Vance smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of inevitability. "We want nothing from you, Zeus. This isn't about demands. This isn't a war of conquest. We don't need your permission, your blessing, or your surrender. This is evolution. We're moving beyond you. All we want is for you to get out of the way." The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the divine rhetoric the gods were used to hearing. For millennia, they had been the ones to decide the fate of lesser beings, to grant or withhold favor. They had been the center of the universe. But now they were being asked, no, told, to step aside. Odin, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, now spoke up. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of centuries of wisdom. "And if we refuse?" Dr. Vance's smile faded. "Then you will die." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the cold precision of someone who knew exactly how things would play out. Odin leaned back in his throne, his single eye fixed on the human. There was no denying the truth anymore. Humanity had surpassed them, not in raw power, but in knowledge, in strategy, and will. The gods had ruled through fear and awe, but humans were no longer afraid. And without fear, the gods had nothing. "We've seen civilizations rise and fall," Odin said slowly, his tone almost mournful. "Empires that thought they would last forever, only to crumble into dust. Is that what you see when you look at us?" Dr. Vance nodded. "You are history now, Odin. It's only a matter of time before your names are forgotten." The All-Father closed his eye and sighed. "Perhaps we were foolish to think we could rule forever." Thor whirled to face his father, disbelief and anger etched on his face. "You're giving up to them." Odin opened his eye and stared at his son. "This is not our world anymore, Thor. The time of gods has passed." Thor shook his head, unable to accept what was happening. "No, I won't believe it. We're stronger than them. We'll fight and we'll die." Odin finished for him. "We will die, Thor, just like Hades." Thor recoiled, as if struck. The truth, bitter as it was unavoidable. For all their power, for all their strength, the gods were not invincible, and humans knew how to end them. "I won't let it happen," Thor growled, his grip on Mjolnir tightening. "I won't just stand by and watch them take everything." Dr. Vance watched the exchange with mild interest. He knew this was the hardest part for them, accepting the end. Every empire, every ruler, Every king faced the same moment of reckoning, and every one of them, without fail, tried to resist. The gods were no different. "You have a choice," Dr. Vance said, addressing the room. "You can try to fight us, and it will end with your destruction, or you can step down peacefully and fade into history. Either way, your time is over. How it ends is up to you." Zeus, Odin, Thor, Ares. All the gods looked at each other, searching for answers, for solutions. But there were none. Not anymore. Finally, it was Hera who spoke. Her voice, usually commanding and full of authority, was quiet, resigned. "If we step down, what happens to us?" Dr. Vance paused, considering the question. "You live, quietly, peacefully. You'll still be remembered for a time. Myths don't disappear overnight, but eventually, you will be forgotten." The gods, once so proud, so sure of their place in the universe, now looked small, defeated. They had always known that time moved forward, that change was inevitable, but they had never imagined it would happen to them. Zeus, his voice heavy with the weight of millennia, finally spoke. "And if we refuse?" Dr. Vance met his gaze, unblinking. "Then we will do to you what we did to Hades." Zeus clenched his fists, lightning crackling around him. But he knew it was futile. The human wasn't bluffing. They had the means to end the gods, once and for all. And as much as Zeus wanted to fight, to rage against the dying of the light, he knew the truth. The gods had lost. "We will consider your offer," Odin said, his voice steady but weary. "But make no mistake, human, this is not a victory for you. This is the natural order of things. All empires fall, even yours." Dr. Vance smiled again, this time with something resembling respect. "Maybe. But for now, it's our time." Without another word, Dr. Vance turned and walked back to his ship, leaving the gods to ponder their future. As the ship lifted off, disappearing into the sky, the gods stood in silence, each one grappling with the same realization. Humanity had surpassed them, and for the first time, the gods truly understood what it meant to be mortal. As Dr. Vance's ship faded from sight, the gods stood frozen in the grand hall of Olympus, a place that had once been the very heart of divine power. Now, it fell hollow. The pillars of white marble and the golden thrones seemed like relics of a time that was slipping through their fingers. Zeus, still clutching at the remnants of his once unshakable power, walked toward the edge of the hall. He looked out over the vast expanse of Olympus, the clouds rolling beneath him, the endless sky stretching into eternity. Once, it had felt like the pinnacle of existence. Now, it felt like a cage. Thor, anger radiating off him in waves, followed his father, Mjolnir hanging loosely in his hand. "Father, we cannot let this stand. We are gods. For the love of all that is sacred, mortals, humans, they cannot be allowed to speak to us this way." Zeus didn't respond. He stared out into the sky, his mind racing. His whole existence had been one of dominance, of control. From the moment he had overthrown the Titans, he had ruled without challenge. But now, the very foundations of his rule had been shaken, and he didn't know how to stop it. "They have the means to kill us, Thor," Odin said, joining his son and Zeus at the edge of the hall. His voice was calm, but beneath the surface, there was a deep undercurrent of sadness. "You saw what they did to Hades. We can't fight them." Thor turned to his father, disbelief etched across his face. "So we just roll over. We give up everything we've built. Let them replace us." Odin looked at his son, his single eye filled with a weariness that had been growing for centuries. "This is the way of things. Empires rise, and they fall. We've seen it before, but we're not an empire." Thor shouted, "We're gods. We were meant to be eternal." Odin shook his head. "No, Thor. Nothing is eternal. Not even us." As the words hung in the air, Zeus clenched his fists, lightning crackling around his knuckles. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, fear, defiance, and a bitter, creeping acceptance. The gods had always believed themselves to be above all things, but now They were facing something they had never anticipated: their own obsolescence. "Do you truly believe we should surrender?" Zeus asked, his voice low, but filled with the weight of the question. Odin sighed, turning to face the king of the gods. "We are not surrendering. We are surviving. If we fight them, we die. All of us. This isn't a war we can win, Zeus. They've outgrown us." Zeus hated the words. He hated that they made sense. But more than anything, he hated the fact that, deep down, he knew Odin was right. Ares, who had been standing in the shadows, finally stepped forward. His armor gleamed in the fading light, and his eyes burned with rage. "You're all cowards," he spat. "We are gods of war, of blood, of power. These humans are ants compared to us. I say we crush them. We gather our forces. We strike them down before they can come for us." Odin and Zeus both turned to him, their expressions unreadable. Ares stepped closer, his chest puffed out, his muscles taut with barely contained fury. "You think they can kill us?" Hades was weak, always skulking in the shadows. "But we are not weak. We are the gods of Olympus. We were forged in the fires of chaos, born of the stars themselves. I say we remind these humans who their creators are." A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the younger gods. Hermes, Apollo, and even Athena exchanged glances. The fear was still there, but Ares' words had lit a spark of defiance in them. They were not used to the idea of defeat. Odin, however, was not moved. He had seen too many battles, too many fallen empires. "This is not the time for war, Ares. You rush into battle without understanding the consequences." Ares sneered. "And you, old man, have lost your spine. If you won't fight, then get out of the way." Odin's eye darkened, but he did not rise to the bait. "This isn't about pride, Ares. It's about survival." "Survival?" Ares growled. "No, this is about showing them that we are not to be trifled with." Zeus watched the exchange, his mind still spinning. He knew Ares' type: proud, arrogant, always ready to fight. But in this case, fighting would only hasten their destruction. Dr. Vance had made that clear. "We cannot win this war," Zeus said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Ares, if you strike against them, it will be the end of us all." Ares turned on Zeus, his eyes wild with fury. "You've grown soft, old man. You were the king of gods once, a ruler who struck down titans. And now look at you, begging for peace for mortals." Zeus met Ares' gaze, unflinching. "This isn't about peace. This is about choosing how we die." The words silenced the hall. Even Ares, in his blind fury, couldn't ignore the truth in them. The gods had always believed themselves invincible, but now they were faced with the harsh reality that they could be ended, by humans no less. "We cannot fight them," Zeus continued, his voice steady. "But we can decide our fate. We can choose to die with dignity, or we can go to war and be wiped out, leaving nothing behind but dust." Ares snarled, but he didn't speak. He knew, as much as he hated it, that Zeus was right. War would only lead to their extinction. "Then what do we do?" Athena asked, her voice quiet but firm. She had always been the strategist, the thinker, and even she could see the impossible position they were in. Zeus closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of his decision settle over him. When he opened them again, there was a strange calm in his gaze. "We leave." The gods stared at him in disbelief. "Leave? Leave Olympus? Leave everything they had built, everything they had ruled for millennia? What do you mean, leave?" Apollo asked, stepping forward. "Where would we go?" Zeus looked out over the sky once more. "We go where gods go when they are no longer needed. We fade into myth." The silence that followed was deafening. The gods, for all their power, had never considered such a fate. They had always been the rulers, the immortals. But now they were faced with the ultimate truth. Even gods could be forgotten. Odin nodded slowly, understanding what Zeus meant. "We become legends, stories told by those who still remember us. And in time, even those stories will fade." Thor's face twisted in pain, but he didn't speak. He had always been a warrior, always believed in fighting until the very end. But this was not a battle he could win. Zeus turned to the remaining gods, his expression grave. This is our only choice. We leave this world to the humans. They have surpassed us, and we cannot stop them. But we can choose how we end. One by one, the gods lowered their heads, accepting the truth. Even Ares, who had always fought for dominance, couldn't deny the inevitable. War was not the answer. Not this time. We leave, Zeus repeated, his voice filled with a quiet finality. And we let humanity take its place. The gods of Olympus, once the rulers of the cosmos, had been dethroned. Not by war, not by rebellion, but by the relentless march of time and the will of humanity. They would fade, as all things do, into the pages of history. But as Zeus looked out over the horizon one last time, a thought crossed his mind. Perhaps this was how it was always meant to be. Olympus had never felt so quiet. The gods, once the rulers of everything beneath the stars, stood together in silence, watching as the last embers of their era flickered out. The sky above them, once filled with divine light, was now dark, as if even the heavens themselves had turned their backs on them. Zeus stood at the edge of the great hall, his hand gripping the railing of his throne. His knuckles were white, and for a moment, he looked more like a man than a god. The weight of eternity had finally come crashing down upon him. Around him, the gods were preparing for their departure, their faces filled with an emotion none of them had ever truly known fear. "Where do we go now?" Athena asked softly, her voice carrying the melancholy of a fading dream. Zeus didn't turn to face her. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, watching the earth below. "We go where all gods go when they are no longer needed," he said. His voice was steady, but there was a hollowness to it. "We become myths, shadows of ourselves, stories told by the fireside, whispered in the dark." Thor, standing a few steps away, scowled, the hammer in his hand feeling heavier than ever before. "Is this really it?" he growled. "We simply walk away, abandon everything." Zeus finally turned, his gaze sweeping over the assembly of gods. "What else would you have us do, Thor? The humans have surpassed us. We fought to remain relevant, but we've lost. They don't need us anymore." Ares slammed his fist into a nearby pillar, cracking the marble. "I still say we should fight. I'd rather go down in flames than fade into nothing." And what would that accomplish? Odin's voice was weary, the weight of centuries resting heavily on his shoulders. "You would die, Ares. We all would. And humanity would continue without us. Fighting would not save us. It would only hasten our end." The other gods, even those who had once been eager for battle, remained silent. The truth had settled over them like a shroud. They were relics now, ghosts clinging to a past that had already slipped away. Zeus moved away from the railing, walking slowly through the great hall. His footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, a stark contrast to the vibrant, bustling realm that Olympus had once been. "We have had our time," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We have ruled for millennia, shaped the stars, and guided the fate of mortals. But all things must end." Hera, her face lined with an emotion she had never allowed herself to show, nodded slowly. "We had our chance. Perhaps it's time to let go." The gods, one by one, lowered their heads, accepting the inevitable. It wasn't just about power anymore. It wasn't about holding on to a throne that no longer existed. It was about dignity, about leaving with what little grace they had left. Odin, the oldest among them, stood tall, his single eye gleaming with a strange mixture of sorrow and pride. "We were the first, and now we will be the last." Zeus stopped in front of him, the two most powerful gods of their respective pantheons meeting eye to eye. There had been times when they had been rivals, times when they had nearly gone to war. But now, they were united in their final moment. "Do you think they'll remember us?" Zeus asked quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. Odin smiled, a sad, knowing smile, for a while. But in time, even the greatest stories fade. Zeus nodded, accepting the truth. He had always known, deep down, that this moment would come. He just hadn't expected it to come so soon. A flicker of light caught his attention, and he looked down at Earth, at the humans below. They were building something. Ships, cities, technology beyond anything even the gods could comprehend. Humanity was moving forward, leaving the divine in their wake. Zeus sighed. They don't need us anymore. No, Odin agreed. They don't. For a long moment, the gods stood together, watching as the world they had once ruled slipped away from them. It was bittersweet, knowing that they had been a part of something great, but also knowing that their time had passed. Thor, unable to stand the silence any longer, stepped forward. So what now? Do we just disappear? Zeus shook his head. No. We go where gods go when they are no longer needed. We leave this world to the humans. They have earned it. The gods, once proud and powerful, began to gather their belongings. They moved slowly, as if every step was a reminder of the life they were leaving behind. The great halls of Olympus, the shining citadel that had stood for millennia, would be empty soon, a monument to a bygone era. As they prepared to leave, a sound echoed through the hall. The gods turned, startled, and saw a figure standing at the entrance. Dr. Vance. He stepped forward, his face calm, his eyes filled with something akin to respect. I didn't come to gloat, he said quietly, sensing the tension in the room. I came to see you off. Zeus regarded the human scientist with a mixture of disdain and admiration. You won. There's no need for you to be here. Dr. Vance shook his head. It's not about winning. It's about understanding. We're standing on the edge of something new, something neither of us has ever seen before. A universe without gods. Zeus frowned, but there was no malice in his expression. And what will that universe look like? Dr. Vance paused, considering the question. Different, he admitted, but not worse. Humanity has always looked to the stars, always reached for more. Now, we will build our own future, without gods. Zeus nodded, understanding. He had seen the same ambition in humanity long ago, back when they were still primitive beings, worshipping the sky and the earth. He had always known they would outgrow him. He just hadn't known it would feel so final. You don't need us anymore, Zeus said softly. Dr. Vance smiled. No, but we will remember you. For a time, the gods, even Ares, accepted the words without protest. There was no point in fighting anymore. They had lost, but at least they could leave on their own terms. Zeus looked to the sky one last time, his heart heavy, but his mind clear. It's time. Odin nodded, stepping beside him. Yes, it is. One by one, the gods of Olympus, the gods of Asgard, the gods of every pantheon that had ever existed, began to fade. Their form shimmered, turning into light, into energy, into memories. They left behind no bodies, no relics, only the stories that would be told by humanity for generations to come. Dr. Vance watched them go, his expression unreadable. He didn't move until the last of the gods had vanished, their presence nothing more than a faint whisper in the wind. The age of gods was over, and the age of humanity had begun. Epilogue. The echo of eternity. Years passed. Decades. Centuries. The stories of the gods lived on in myth, in legend. Children told tales of Zeus, of Odin, of Thor and Athena. But as time went on, those stories became distant memories, forgotten in the march of progress. Humanity spread across the stars, conquering new worlds, creating new civilizations. They no longer needed gods. They had become their own masters, their own creators. But deep in the quiet corners of the universe, in the dark places where the old things still lingered, there was a whisper of gods. And though they were forgotten, though their names were lost to time, the gods were still there, watching, waiting. For gods never truly die. They simply fade, and in time, even gods may rise again.